Saw Savannah's video today, the verbiage, the majorly upped reward. What do you think the tactic was there, strategy behind the scene from the FBI with the Guthrie family?
Yeah, well, I'll first start with the earliest messages, those messages around the time when the ransom notes were coming out and we thought we were dealing with a kidnapping for ransom. Those were very structured by the FBI, working in close conjunction with the family. Then you saw one from Savannah about a week ago or so that was more emotional, more unscripted, asking just for pleas for tips and the help. And that's what you see now is more of that unstructured, heart-wrenching, very emotional, and speaking more from the heart. What's happening behind the scenes is that the FBI, and there's investigators with the FBI, there are victim specialists, and then there used to be negotiators, and they're probably still involved, but I don't think that kidnapping for ransom is a legitimate lead anymore. So you have investigators and victim specialists working closely with the family. Investigators are working as hard as they can to identify leads, drum up tips, try to nail down who did this, and then ultimately arrest, prosecute, find Nancy. What victim specialists are doing is they're focusing on the family, and they really do have the best interest of the family at heart here, because this is an incredibly difficult time for the family. Like, they're dealing with unknown grief, right? There's no resolution, no end in sight. It's a really traumatic way to grieve because you just don't feel like you have any answers, and you almost feel helpless. So at this point, those victim specialists are talking with the family, and the family wants to act. They want to do something to help the case. This $1 million family side of the reward is their act to help boost up the number of tips, and not just the number, but the quality of tips as well, that helps the investigation. So it's kind of part of the grieving process for the family, but also they're working in conjunction with investigators and boosting.
In a case already defined by fear, unanswered questions, and public scrutiny, a new flashpoint has emerged. Tommaso Cioni has publicly pushed back against statements made by the Pima County Sheriff's Department, accusing the agency of mischaracterizing his involvement in the investigation into the disappearance of 84-year-old Nancy Guthrie. Nancy vanished from her home in Tucson in the early hours of February 1, 2026. Authorities have said from the outset that they believe she was abducted. Her personal belongings were left behind, and surveillance footage from the neighborhood captured suspicious activity. The case quickly drew national attention, not only because of the disturbing circumstances, but also because Nancy is the mother of Savannah Guthrie, co-anchor of NBC's Today Show. Now, weeks into the investigation, tensions between law enforcement and outside parties have spilled into public view. In a statement released just minutes before media outlets began reporting on it, Cioni sharply criticized what he described as false claims attributed to the sheriff's office regarding his findings and role. According to Cioni, certain public remarks implied that he had circulated unverified theories or misrepresented evidence connected to the case. The sheriff's department, for its part, has maintained that it is working methodically and cautioned against speculation that could complicate the investigation. Officials have emphasized that tips are being vetted carefully and that public cooperation remains critical. Cioni's response marks a turning point, not in the disappearance itself, but in the narrative surrounding it. With national media closely watching every development, the dispute raises broader questions. Who controls the message in a high-profile missing person case? How should independent investigators interact with law enforcement? And most importantly, will public disagreements help or hinder the search for Nancy Guthrie? As the investigation continues, one thing is clear. The case has entered a new and more complicated chapter. The tension began with a press briefing delivered by representatives of the Pima County Sheriff's Department, who sought to clarify what they described as misinformation circulating publicly about the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie. Without nomming every outside voice directly at first, officials emphasized that only verified evidence released through official channels should be considered credible. But the message quickly zeroed in on commentary attributed to Tommaso Cioni, a private investigator who had spoken publicly about potential leads. According to the sheriff's office, certain claims linked to Cioni, particularly suggestions involving organized criminal activity, were not supported by evidence gathered by law enforcement. Authorities stated that such assertions could distract from viable leads and create unnecessary fear within the community. The sheriff's office stressed that the investigation remains active and methodical. Detectives, working alongside federal partners, have continued reviewing surveillance footage, forensic findings from Nancy's home, and tip line submissions. Officials reiterated that no confirmed ransom demand, cartel link, or cross-border operation had been verified at that stage of the investigation. The public nature of the clarification was notable. In high-profile cases, law enforcement agencies often guard investigative details closely. But as national media coverage intensified, in part because Nancy is the mother of Savannah Guthrie, officials appeared increasingly concerned about competing narratives gaining traction online. Within hours of the sheriff's remarks, Cioni issued his rebuttal. He argued that his comments had been taken out of context and that he had never presented speculative theories as confirmed facts. According to his statement, his role was to pursue additional leads at the family's request and to raise questions, not conclusions. The clash highlighted a delicate balance in missing person investigations. The urgency to generate leads versus the responsibility to protect the integrity of evidence. For the Guthrie family, and for the public watching closely, the disagreement introduced yet another layer of uncertainty in an already deeply unsettling case. As the search for Nancy continues, the conflict over information, who has it, who shares it, and how it is interpreted, has become almost as significant as the physical search itself. Behind the headlines and public exchanges, the search for Nancy Guthrie continues in a far more methodical and evidence-driven manner. According to updates from the Pima County Sheriff's Department, investigators have focused on forensic analysis, digital evidence, and neighborhood surveillance in Tucson, where Nancy disappeared in the early morning hours of February 1. Authorities confirmed that Nancy's home was processed extensively for physical evidence. Personal belongings, including her phone, wallet, and vehicle, were left behind, reinforcing investigators' belief that she did not leave voluntarily. Detectives have also examined doorbell camera systems in the surrounding area. One critical detail previously acknowledged by officials is that her home security system was disabled shortly before her disappearance, a fact that significantly shaped the direction of the case. Law enforcement has worked alongside federal agencies, including the Federal Bureau of Investigation, to analyze digital footprints and possible vehicle movements captured in the vicinity. Investigators have stated that every credible tip is being followed up, and forensic results are being processed as they become available.
Good morning. I hope you've been kind of informed of the rules. That I'm going to try to get as many, if not all of you, an opportunity to ask a question. But last time we tried this, it was just kind of chaotic, people yelling. So I'd ask that you just kind of be patient with me, pay attention to the questions asked, because sometimes you guys want to ask the same question twice, and you're going to get the same answer. So help yourself, get what you can out of this. I'm going to give you one question and a follow-up, okay? But before we get there, I do have some comments. First of all, I want to begin by offering our condolences to our partners at the state Department of Public Safety's tragically lost 2 members last night in a helicopter crash up in northern Arizona. So if you would keep them in your prayers, Colonel Glover and his team, I'm sure, would have greatly appreciated it. Along the same lines, I think you all saw last night, I'm trying to speak up, not yell, because apparently I talk soft.
However, officials have been careful not to publicly disclose sensitive details that could compromise investigative strategy. The public dispute with Tommaso Cioni has not altered the core investigative steps, according to law enforcement statements. Officials reiterated that while outside information is reviewed, only evidence verified through official channels guides operational decisions. Meanwhile, the family of Nancy, including her daughter, Savannah Guthrie, has continued to appeal for information. A reward has been offered for credible tips leading to Nancy's recovery, further underscoring the urgency and gravity of the situation. Despite intense media attention, investigators maintain that cases of this complexity often require patience. Each piece of evidence must be corroborated. Each timeline must be verified. Each lead must withstand scrutiny. As public debate over information unfolds, the investigative machinery continues quietly behind the scenes, focused not on statements or speculation, but on one central objective: finding Nancy Guthrie and determining exactly what happened that night. As the official investigation continued under the direction of the Pima County Sheriff's Department, attention increasingly turned to the presence of independent investigators working parallel to law enforcement. Among them was Tommaso Cioni, whose involvement added both momentum and controversy to the search for Nancy Guthrie. Private investigators are not uncommon in high-profile missing person cases, particularly when families seek additional resources or alternative perspectives. They often review publicly available evidence, re-interview potential witnesses, and pursue leads that may fall outside the immediate scope of law enforcement priorities. In emotionally charged cases, especially those that draw national attention, families sometimes turn to independent professionals for reassurance that every possible avenue is being explored. In this case, Cioni stated publicly that his role was to support the family and examine potential leads. He emphasized that he did not have access to the full body of evidence collected by authorities, nor did he claim to replace official investigative efforts. However, friction emerged when some of his comments were interpreted by law enforcement as speculative or unsupported by verified findings. The dispute underscores a long-standing tension in criminal investigations: collaboration versus control. Law enforcement agencies are bound by evidentiary standards, prosecutorial considerations, and procedural rules that restrict what can be shared publicly. Independent investigators, while also professionals, operate under different constraints and may speak more freely. Officials from the Sheriff's Department cautioned that unverified public claims could complicate witness interviews or influence potential jurors should charges eventually be filed. Cioni, in contrast, argued that raising awareness of possible angles could generate tips that might otherwise remain undiscovered. For the public watching the case unfold, the debate highlighted the complex ecosystem surrounding modern investigations. Law enforcement, private investigators, media outlets, and online communities all contributing to the flow of information. Yet beneath the professional disagreements lies the same objective shared by all parties: locating Nancy Guthrie and uncovering the truth about what happened in the early hours of February 1. As the search for Nancy Guthrie stretched on, the case evolved beyond a local investigation in Tucson into a national story. The reason was unavoidable. Nancy is the mother of Savannah Guthrie, a prominent co-anchor on NBC's morning program. With that connection came intense media coverage, constant updates, and an unrelenting spotlight. Major networks, newspapers, and digital platforms followed every development, from surveillance footage releases to public statements made by the Pima County Sheriff's Department. Press briefings were broadcast live. Online discussions multiplied. Social media amplified both confirmed facts and unverified rumors at extraordinary speed. The involvement of Tommaso Cioni added another layer to the media narrative. His public rebuttal of the sheriff's remarks quickly became a headline in its own right. What might otherwise have remained a procedural disagreement between investigators transformed into a widely discussed controversy, dissected across television panels and online forums. Public scrutiny in high-profile cases can be both beneficial and challenging. On one hand, widespread coverage keeps a missing person's name in the public consciousness, potentially generating tips and maintaining investigative momentum. On the other, constant attention can magnify speculation, misinterpret statements, and increase pressure on investigators to respond quickly, sometimes before every fact is fully verified. For the Guthrie family, the visibility brings complex emotions. Public awareness can fuel hope that someone somewhere may recognize a critical detail. Yet the same visibility means every development, every rumor, every official clarification unfolds before a national audience. As headlines continue to track the dispute between law enforcement and independent voices, one truth remains at the center of the story. An 84-year-old woman is still missing. Beyond press conferences and public statements, the human urgency of the case remains unchanged. While public debate unfolded between Pima County Sheriff's Department and Tommaso Cioni, something quieter, but equally powerful, was happening on the ground in Tucson. Community members began organizing search efforts, distributing flyers and sharing verified updates in hopes of generating new leads in the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie. Neighbors reviewed doorbell camera footage again and again, scanning for unfamiliar vehicles or unusual activity from the night Nancy vanished. Volunteer groups coordinated search grids in surrounding desert areas, careful to avoid interfering with official law enforcement operations. Community leaders urged residents to report tips directly to authorities rather than relying on social media threads that might distort details. The sheriff's department continued to encourage public cooperation, emphasizing that even the smallest piece of information could prove critical. Investigators reminded residents that credible tips should be submitted through official hotlines so they could be documented and assessed properly. Federal partners, including the Federal Bureau of Investigation, remained involved, reinforcing the seriousness of the case. At the same time, the Guthrie family's public appeals, particularly from Savannah Guthrie, resonated deeply. Her emotional requests for information humanized the story beyond headlines and investigative disputes. The offered reward for credible information further underscored the urgency. Despite tension between investigative voices, community focus remained largely unified. Bring Nancy home. Volunteers did not debate press statements, they walked search paths. Residents did not argue about jurisdiction, they checked cameras and shared confirmed updates responsibly. In high-profile cases, public involvement can become chaotic. In Tucson, many residents appeared determined to channel concern into structured. As the investigation moved forward, it became clear that the search for Nancy Guthrie was unfolding on two fronts, one rooted in physical evidence and investigative procedure, and another shaped by public messaging and perception. The disagreement between Tommaso Cioni and the Pima County Sheriff's Department evolved into a broader conversation about narrative control in high-profile cases. Law enforcement agencies traditionally guard information closely, releasing only what they believe will aid the investigation without compromising strategy. Officials reiterated that premature or speculative claims could jeopardize witness testimony, taint potential jurors, or alert persons of interest. Their stance was clear: accuracy must outweigh urgency. Cioni, however, maintained that raising questions publicly was not equivalent to declaring conclusions. In his rebuttal, he emphasized that his intention was to generate momentum and prevent the case from losing visibility. According to his statement, public awareness can sometimes lead to breakthroughs, particularly when time is critical in a suspected abduction. The media amplified both positions. News outlets framed the exchange as a clash of perspectives, official caution versus independent persistence. Online commentary intensified the divide, with some arguing that law enforcement transparency should increase, while others insisted investigative discipline must remain intact. Meanwhile, in Tucson, detectives continued their work largely unchanged by the public debate. In the end, the public exchange between Tommaso Cioni and the Pima County Sheriff's Department reflects a larger truth about modern investigations. Information now moves as fast as emotion. In the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie, every statement, clarification, and rebuttal has carried national weight. Yet beneath the headlines, press briefings, and televised discussions remains a singular, undeniable fact. An 84-year-old woman vanished from her home in Tucson, and she has not been found. Law enforcement continues to emphasize evidence-based procedure. Independent investigators continue to assert the importance of exploring every possible angle. Media outlets continue to report developments as they unfold. The public continues to watch closely, and the family, including Savannah Guthrie, continues to ask for answers. Disagreements over messaging may shape perception, but they do not change the core mission. Every forensic review, every surveillance clip, every tip line call is part of a larger effort to uncover what happened in the early hours of February 1. Officials have reiterated that credible information should be directed through official investigative channels so it can be properly assessed. High-profile cases often evolve into layered narratives, part investigation, part public discourse. But ultimately, the story is not about professional friction or media attention. It is about resolution. It is about accountability. It is about bringing clarity to a situation defined by uncertainty. Until definitive answers emerge, the case remains open, active, and human. Beyond statements and speculation, one objective stands above all others: finding Nancy Guthrie and establishing the truth.